Here we are at last, folks, but before we begin, a few disclosures. First of all, thank you PlayStation for the review copy and for providing it so early. We had like 3 weeks with the game, which is awesome. Second of all, no spoilers whatsoever in this review. There is going to be gameplay footage shown, but a lot of the important stuff that happens in this game will not be covered in any way here. And finally, I had roughly 20 minutes of footage that I could use per guideline, so you might see a lot of repeat footage or footage from marketing material. But in terms of the gameplay footage I captured, you're only going to see stuff from the first 3 chapters of the game, and even then I'm showing as little as possible. So with all that out of the way, please enjoy my review of Death Stranding. The lead up to Death Stranding's launch has been one hell of a ride, and through it all, nobody was 100% sure what to anticipate, myself included. Even once gameplay was shown, the world continued to wonder just what the heck is this game? There's a delivery man and he delivers packages, is that it? Can a game about delivering packages be interesting or offer any kind of depth? You wouldn't think so, but turns out the answer to that question is a resounding yes. Before I delve deeper, let's get one thing out of the way. Death Stranding is in every way a Hideo Kojima game. It is striking in its presentation, intriguing in its gameplay systems, fully committed to its themes and messages, and it's got something to say. Those are the types of games that stick with me, the ones that have a strong voice, the ones that express something genuine and from the heart, the ones that reflect a piece of the creator during a time in their lives. In the case of Death Stranding, this was a game that was conceived during a time when Kojima felt like he had lost everything. But through the connections he's made, the strands and knots he's formed, and the relationships he's fostered, he was quickly able to get back on his feet, and Death Stranding is not only a culmination of all that, but it also feels like an ode and dedication to all those who extended a helping hand. The theme of Death Stranding is connections, and this is deeply ingrained throughout its narrative and gameplay. Now, I will say this, the game may not be everyone's cup of tea. I do foresee some people playing a couple hours and tuning out before the game's had a chance to fully spread its wings, but I do believe this, if you keep an open mind and see the roughly 50 hours journey all the way through, it'll stay with you. There's just nothing that quite looks or feels like Death Stranding, and while its core gameplay loop takes a risky approach that not all will be enamored by, I think a lot of people will find it oddly captivating and daring in ways that few AAA games are, a daringness that to me really paid off. Death Stranding is a slow burn. For its first few hours, I didn't know if I was going to like this game, but as I kept tracking on, as the gameplay systems peeled back the layers, as the plot unraveled, and as the game climaxed to some truly mesmerizing moments and an emotionally cathartic finale, everything clicked, and not only was I hooked throughout most of my time with the game, but by the time the credits rolled, I was legitimately blown away. Story is one aspect of this review that I don't want to delve too deeply into for obvious reasons, but stylistically, it's got all the signatures of a Hideo Kojima story. It's deeply philosophical, thematic, symbolic, and distinctly outlandish. There is a ton of world building. There is an eccentric cast of supporting characters whose life stories you'll get to know in dramatic fashion, each facing their own struggles, conundrums, circumstances, and/or afflictions in the wake of the Death Stranding cataclysm. There are conspiracies and mysteries to uncover, as well as plot twists to look forward to. And of course, this wouldn't be a Kojima game if it didn't feature hours of cutscenes to bask at, all beautifully presented and directed, particularly the ones that delve neck deep into the game's uniquely Lovecraftian visual palette. These cutscenes are further bolstered by generally great performances from its star-studded cast, with performance capture conveying all of the actors' subtle nuances through impressively detailed and animated character models that are further bolstered by great lighting effects. If I had a nitpick, I'd say there are moments in which dialogue can feel unnatural, lack subtlety, and be too on the nose about the way it conveys themes, messages, and information, but with all said and done, the game's top-notch presentation across all facets, visual and audio, keeps the experience consistently engrossing. Suffice to say, Death Stranding is a very Kojima story, presented in a very Kojima way. Hearing this, some might expect an incomprehensible story awaits, but honestly, despite some heavy-handed exposition, whose barrage of pseudoscientific terms and acronyms and pseudo-history may leave some scratching their heads, at no point did I feel as though the core story beats were hard to understand. The game does a good job of easing you into the world. You'll come to understand all the insane imagery seen in the trailers, and most importantly, the emotional core core of Death Stranding's story never got lost in the details, which is particularly pivotal given this is Kojima's most character-driven story yet, I feel. It's also worth noting that while Death Stranding does inherit much of Kojima's signature style, it is truly its own work with a distinct flavor from his past endeavors. But the most radical departure of all is found in Death Stranding's strangely engrossing gameplay. You are Sam Porter Bridges, a delivery man or porter, a profession deemed a valuable commodity in a world ravaged and divided by a mysterious cataclysmic phenomenon called the Death Stranding. The ensuing post-apocalypse has resulted in the collapse of most key infrastructures that would form a modern functioning society, and thus the once United States of America has splintered. In turn, many people have resorted to living in isolation rather than contributing to society as a collective whole. And that's where porters come in. They are thin threads that loosely connect segregated cities, settlements, outposts, and shelters by making deliveries the old-fashioned way, on foot, during a time when humanity is at its most sequestered. Sam is eventually pulled by old acquaintances into a much larger endeavor, rebuilding society and reconnecting America from coast to coast, both physically and socially. The key to doing so is convincing key cities, outposts, and establishments to join what's called the chiral network, Death Stranding's supernatural version of the internet, one that takes advantage of the mysterious properties of the Death Stranding phenomenon to send and receive information and even print certain types of matter in the form of structures and tools and weapons and vehicles and such. So Sam, after some convincing, is tasked with going from east to west and fulfilling this ambitious mission, all while delivering important packages along the way. So that's what you do as the player. The bulk of Death Stranding's gameplay revolves around delivering cargo and packages of varying weights, sizes, and quantities from delivery terminal to delivery terminal, connecting all of these places into the chiral network with your Cupid necklace, pushing further and further west, overcoming the challenges set forth by Mother Nature and that weirdo cousin Death Stranding in an expansive world, and doing your best to keep packages and cargo you're tasked with transporting safe along the way, while fulfilling specific conditions like not going past the threshold of package damage, ensuring certain packages don't come in contact with substances like water, fulfilling a time limit, and more. All easier said than done. The game's ravaged post-apocalyptic world is your constant adversary in Death Stranding, and the game's mechanics and progression system are all tailored around overcoming it. Just about any route can be taken to reach your destination, but only if you have the right tools and take the right approach, as the game imposes limitations on Sam. You'll definitely want to keep a close eye on the stamina bar, for example, as it's what will allow Sam to perform arduous tasks and traverse rougher terrain. If stamina depletes in the middle of a rough trek, Sam's body might give out and take a tumble. A lack of proper rest will result in your maximum stamina depleting over time until you take a break in hot springs scattered throughout the map or private rooms accessible in Bridges facilities. These mini-hubs where you can mess around, look at and customize certain equipment on display, take showers and relieve yourself of bodily fluids that can be repurposed into anti-BT weapons, and check in on your trusty partner and ever-adorable BB. Beyond stamina, the weight of your packages, the amount of cargo you're carrying, and the way your cargo is arranged and stacked will have a drastic effect on your ability to navigate the open world. There's an entire menu dedicated to managing cargo in Death Stranding, accessible almost any time. It's not the most intuitive of menus to navigate through, but you get used to it, and it comes with a very useful auto-arrange feature that does a great job of optimizing how packages are placed on Sam's body, which is really important given how weight is distributed across Sam's body alongside how much weight and how highly stacked packages are will affect Sam's speed, balance, endurance, bearings, maneuverability, and general mobility. Give him too much to carry and Sam will feel heavy, slow, and clumsy to control. Stamina will drain faster. It'll be easier for him to trip on obstacles or slip on wet surfaces, and it'll be more difficult to hide from enemy sight, run away from encounters, or engage in combat. Give him too little to carry though, and you'll end up with a Sam who controls more gracefully but may not have enough tools to overcome unexpected roadblocks, or may not be able to fulfill as many orders or deliver as many packages in one round trip. I've heard the term walking simulator being used jokingly, but the funny thing is, this game does mechanically simulate walking more than the average video game. In a more traditional game, game, you just kind of hold the analog stick in a direction and don't have to pay much attention to movement because it's all automated for you. But in Death Stranding, the game demands your focus as you tread through the world. Otherwise, you'll end up falling over and damaging precious cargo. To prevent that from happening, you'll be managing your balance with the left and right trigger buttons. You can also hold down both trigger buttons at the same time to make Sam hold both shoulder straps, center his weight, and hunker down. He's significantly slower like this, but maintains much better balance. It's strange managing all of this at first. If you imagine your average game as a bicycle with trainer wheels, Death Stranding removes the trainer wheels, forcing you to be more conscious about how you ride your bike if you don't want to topple over. There was a bit of an adjustment period, but once I got the hang of it, it became second nature to me. The game provides contextual button prompts constantly to ensure players always know how to react, and over time, I grew accustomed to all the tells that indicate when Sam is about to lose balance or take a tumble. I got the hang of making careful turns when Sam is carrying a lot of cargo. I learned when are good times to speed up and slow down, and I really got in sync with the game's involved mobility system. It's equally important to watch out for the type of terrain you're traversing and get the lay of the land, which you can do by scanning the environment with the Odradek, the handy shoulder-mounted mechanical arm that you'll have with you at all times. Doing so will reveal which nearby terrain is safe to traverse and which require you to tread more lightly. I eventually grew used to the world's visual cues and became less reliant on the Odradek scanner, but I always had to pay attention. So yeah, mobility alone has some unusually in-depth mechanics that coincide with this game's emphasis on terrain traversal. Furthermore, the meticulous attention to detail in the variety of animations, sound effects, and pacing give Sam's movement a tactile feeling. There's some annoying collision jankiness that can get in the way of a smooth experience, particularly when you're moving through rocky surfaces, and this goes doubly true for vehicles. But for the most part, it works as intended, and its implementation consistently keeps world navigation engaging. Now, starting out, you'll have nothing but your hands and feet alongside a few basic tools like extendable ladders that can double as makeshift bridges, and anchor ropes that will allow you to scale up or down large cliffs to assist you. But as you progress through the campaign, the game will introduce new tools and upgrades that will allow for more expedient travel, more efficient and compact forms of cargo transportation, and better ways to fend off hostile enemies. At the same time, the game never lets you get too comfortable, with level design constantly forcing you to mix up your approach. For example, a few hours into the game, I finally unlocked motorcycles, which not only allowed me to offload cargo to take some weight off of Sam's shoulders, but also significantly enhanced my travel speed. Just as I got too complacent with the motorcycle, the game introduced areas whose rough terrain made vehicular navigation untenable. For these areas, hovering carriers were far more useful, as they carry a ton of cargo without getting bogged down by rocky surfaces, though I did lose the speed offered by vehicles, and I also learned that while carriers are deployed, I'm unable to climb ropes or steeply angled ladders. All tools you unlock have their pros and cons, and you'll want to weigh them carefully before you decide which ones are best suited for which deliveries as you plot out paths towards your destination. At some point, the game will introduce the ability to build or print certain useful structures anywhere in the game world in regions that are connected to the chiral network, and this is where the game really goes up a level. As you progress through the campaign, you'll unlock the ability to print and place things like post boxes, which allow for storage of packages for safekeeping mid-journey, generators that act as quick stops for recharging battery-powered vehicles and contraptions, timefall shelters that will keep packages safe from the deteriorating effects of timefall, watchtowers that will enable surveillance of a large radius and tagging of any nearby enemies and points of interest, bridges that will make it far more practical to cross over cliffs and rivers, especially if you're traversing with vehicles, safe houses that will allow access to private rooms without having to return to a bridge's facility, and more. All of them are invaluable conveniences that, as you strategically place them throughout the world, will make your life so much easier, especially with deliveries that require backtracking. All of these elements contribute to a game that's all about resource management, planning and preparation, as well as weighing risk and reward. Taking on a bunch of deliveries at once and carrying a bunch of packages means less round trips and more potential rewards in one go, but there's a higher risk of messing up and damaging packages, along with more cargo management and navigational constraints to consider. In planning ahead, the map will be your best friend, as it allows you to look at topography, place markers, and plot routes to your destinations. You'll want to utilize every advantage you have, as rushing ahead blind will only lead to wasted time and regrets. The real magic kicks in when you connect online as part of what's called the social strand system. The best way I can describe it is if Dark Souls' online messaging system and elements of Fallout Settlement's construction system had a baby. Every tool you place in the world, every structure you build, every package you lose, every vehicle you leave behind, and every sign or emoji you place can also be found, accessed, and used in a separate instance by other players who are part of your bridge link, your server, but only in regions connected to the chiral network, which acts as a meta representation of our internet connection to each other. So when a region gets hooked up to the chiral network, on top of unlocking the ability to build structures there, you'll see the map light up with icons showing useful tools, structures, vehicles, packages, and signs other players who have also connected to the region's chiral network in their respective playthroughs have placed in it. And suddenly that region develops an infrastructure comprised of interconnecting contributions on the part of yourself and online players. It's a clever thing Death Stranding does to convey its theme of connections. The first time you journey through a region not yet part of the chiral network, you are forced to struggle at it alone. But once you fulfill deliveries in that region connected to the network and start finding other players delightfully and usefully placed ladders, anchors, structures, vehicles, and packages, as well as signs and emojis, you see the stark contrast between what it was to make deliveries by yourself versus what it's like to do so when everyone is holding hands. I've come across so many situations where I was able to overcome precarious situations because of other players' contributions. So one time there was this really wide river that I had to cross, but I didn't have enough ladders to use as makeshift bridges. But then I noticed that other players had placed their own ladders that I could link up to. Another time I had run out of anchors to rappel down a particularly steep cliff, but then I found an anchor that somebody else had placed that I could make use of. On numerous occasions, well-placed generators from other players proved invaluable and paved the way for smoother, faster, and longer journeys with battery-powered vehicles and exoskeletons. There were times when I really needed to replenish Sam's stamina in the middle of a long journey, and just when I thought I was out of luck, I stumbled upon a safe house another player had tactfully placed in the world. When I needed to replenish certain items, post boxes placed in convenient spots by other players would allow me to access the share locker and retrieve useful things that have been communally donated to it. If I was in need of a vehicle, I'd sometimes find one abandoned by other players in the world or in garages where players can share vehicles with each other. While driving vehicles, I was always so grateful when a bridge required to cross over a large cliff or a wide river was already placed by another player. You can even entrust other players to make deliveries of non-critical path packages, or you yourself can make deliveries of packages entrusted by other players, all for mutual benefits. Or if other players left behind tools in the world throughout their playthrough, that tool may appear in your instance of the game, which you can then pick up and use to your liking. With how helpful other players were throughout my time with the game, I felt compelled to pull my weight as well by building convenient structures in places that myself and others might find useful. One time the game even allowed me to finish another player's bridge that was still under construction, and now that bridge could help me and possibly other players as well. Death Stranding is a game where everyone stands to gain by being helpful. It is entirely possible to play this game solo, mind you, but you'd be missing out on an optional but really compelling aspect of Death Stranding by not connecting online. Further encouraging cooperation is the game's social media style like system that allows you to express approval by showering anything placed by other players with thumbs ups. The game keeps track of these likes and constantly sends notifications about likes received and when anything placed by you was used by another player. It's essentially a point system that creates a somewhat competitive environment where you get the most points by being the most helpful. Beyond forming connections with real people, you'll also be doing the same with the fictional denizens of Death Stranding by taking orders and successfully delivering packages, and they'll in turn reward you with new tools, structures, vehicles, weapons, features, optional cosmetics, and gifts, you name it. With each successful delivery, the results screen will detail and rank how well you did. The better you do, the more likes you'll earn, and the faster your connection level with the recipient will grow. As connection levels with these establishments increase, you'll unlock even more tools and weapons, higher level versions of tools and weapons that will enhance their capabilities and make them more compact and portable, a variety of features and functionalities, new cosmetics, new interview transcripts for additional lore building, and a few fun, silly extra things here and there. Higher connection levels will also increase an establishment's storage capacity for crafting materials, which can be spent on replenishing unlocked items, tools, weapons, structures, and vehicles, as well as building and or repairing larger structures like bridges and roads. Completing deliveries will also level up Sam's porter grade, as well as 5 attributes. As these attributes improve, Sam will earn passive abilities like bolstered social features, boosts in max cargo weight, improved endurance, better balance and mobility, etc. Almost everything you unlock throughout the campaign and all of Sam's character progression serve one purpose: to become more efficient at navigating the world, its obstructions, and its hazards, and to help others do the same. Speaking of hazards, there are 2 types of enemies you'll commonly encounter: mules and BTs. Mules are marauder-type enemies who'll be looking to steal your packages. You'll find their encampments scattered throughout specific locations in the world, and looking at the map will reveal areas where they're active, which if you step into will lead to your packages eventually getting pinged, thereby attracting the mule's attention. In these situations, you can either take a stealthy approach or go full assault mode. I should warn you, stealth is pretty hard to pull off in this game. Mules can spot you from long distances, and Sam has none of the agility, skills, and maneuvers of a highly trained special ops super soldier like Snake. As a result, I found myself getting detected quite often despite my best efforts, at which point it's fight or flight. Melee combat will be your best friend starting out, which feels rather clunky, I've gotta say. Granted, Sam is no combatant, so this may in part be intentional, but it's still less responsive than I'd like it to be. I did eventually get the hang of it, got good at it, and if you know what you're doing, Sam can actually be pretty overpowered, especially when you get good at picking up packages strewn on the ground with the trigger buttons and swinging them at enemies, or even more gratifying, hurling them at distant foes. The AI is also quite exploitable, and they don't always take full advantage of their strength in numbers. Throughout my playthrough, I've consistently punched, swung, and hurled my way through entire camps with little issue, and that was always way faster than taking a stealthy approach. Not to mention that knocking out all enemies in a camp allowed me to freely explore it and loot any useful packages and valuable crafting materials unimpeded. Now, over time, as your tools and weapons evolve, so will the enemy, so there is still a level of caution to be mindful of. You do eventually unlock long-range weapons that make stealth easier and your combat capabilities all the more overpowered. As far as shooting mechanics go, Death Stranding feels similar to MGS5, so not the best, most precise, most tactile, or most responsive, but functional. You've got the usual handguns and rifles and shotguns with lethal or non-lethal varieties, but I particularly enjoyed less conventional weapons like the bullet gun, with which I've ensnared and knocked out entire camps. Your repertoire of weapons does grow alongside your tools and structures at a good pace over the course of the campaign. When you're not dealing with enemies from the world of the living, you'll probably be faced with specters from the world of the dead, BTs, who appear where there's timefall in the open world. You start out pretty powerless against BTs, forced to sneak past them by heeding the guidance of your shoulder-mounted Ogre deck, a BT radar of sorts connected to BB and its unique affinity with the world of the dead. While Sam can sense and see BTs when he's perfectly still, as soon as he starts moving, they become invisible, so making your way through a minefield of BTs is this careful dance of playing red light, green light, keeping an eye on the Ogre deck, and strategically holding your breath and minding your stamina when BTs get too close for comfort. These tense and visually unique segments demand focus, as one careless move could rapidly result in your ensnarement. You do eventually start unlocking weapons that will enable you to fight back against BTs, namely weapons that use Sam's bodily waste and fluids as ammunition. Some of the earlier anti-BT weapons involve variations of grenades that explode with Sam's urine, feces, or blood. Over time, these anti-BT weapons do become more intricate and refined. Should you become ensnared by a BT, you'll be dragged into a twisted, flooded version of the surrounding area, where you'll face mini-boss battles in the form of sizable, more uniquely shaped BTs. As cool as these sequences are visually, I did find these mini-boss battles offered very little challenge. Their attacks are basic and easy to anticipate, and slaying them is as simple as spamming blood grenades. Optionally, you can just run away from them by leaving the flooded area, which takes a bit of time, but isn't super difficult to do either. Fortunately, there are far more epic, bona fide boss battles to look forward to throughout the course of the main campaign, with real standout ones appearing towards the last third of it. You'll encounter everything from much larger scale BT battles to skirmishes with some of the game's humanoid antagonists, with the latter being the more interesting confrontations. I do wish boss battles weren't so easy in the first half of the game, but as the game progresses and nears its climax, they do become more intricate, interesting, and challenging, and they also become increasingly out of this world visually. The point is that there is stuff that happens throughout your deliveries to mix things up, but at the same time, world traversal is the foundation of this experience, with mechanics and systems reinforcing what is at its core, a game about a delivery man overcoming a ravaged world that's quite sizable and often stunning to behold, with a solid frame rate performance to boot. There are some noticeable frame rate dips from time to time, but nothing all that frequent or seriously detrimental. Overall, the Decima engine puts in work in Death Stranding, often presenting vistas that straight up look like Bob Ross paintings come to life. I do wish the game's interiors were as visually impressive as the exteriors. Interiors all look kinda generic, boring, and samey. Giving these interiors more visual variety would have gone a long way to making reaching each destination more interesting. It should also be noted that Death Stranding's open world is quite desolate, acting as a blank canvas that players can paint together with their contributions to form a navigational infrastructure. There are obviously some things the developers fill the world with, but don't expect to find NPCs and side quests sprinkled throughout the world a la Skyrim. This isn't that type of game, and this does feel intentional on the developer's part, as the whole point of this game is that sense of isolation and loneliness in a harsh world that can be alleviated by these connections formed with other players via the chiral network. NPCs do exist, mind you, but they are almost exclusively confined to their respective cities, settlements, outposts, or shelters, with the vast majority of the more generic NPCs appearing as holograms projected by delivery terminals, which does make interactions with them rather impersonal. This would be less detrimental if NPCs had more interesting things to say, but there isn't much in the way of interesting side stories outside of the critical path. That's one area where I wish the game would have been more fleshed out. There is far too little narrative incentive or gameplay variety to keep the standard orders, the side missions, from feeling dull and repetitive. They're not absolutely necessary though, you can put them aside until after you finish the campaign if you so desire, but I don't foresee side missions offering enough intrigue to keep people playing for much longer once the campaign is over. But I'm okay with a journey that comes to a discernible end. By the end of the 50 hours journey, I felt the game said everything it needed to say, showed everything it needed to show, and I was wholeheartedly satisfied with the culmination of all its build-up. If there is one thing I hope, it's that people who pick this game up will play it all the way through before judging it. Even if it doesn't immediately hook you, let that slow burn sink in, let the game build, experience all the campaign has to offer, and then judge it, because there really is more to the game than skeptics might think, and it really does go out with a bang despite taking its time getting there. This is just such a hard game to market because showing a piece of it looks boring and doesn't really paint a full picture, but when you play the whole thing, when you see how one thing leads to another and how the whole game comes together, it just clicks. It takes balls to attempt a project like this. I mean, who's crazy enough to take millions of dollars and decide, let's use this money to make an open world delivery man game? Who freaking does that? But if you ask me, Kojima and team pulled it off. Just about everything he set out to do with this game thematically was achieved in a compelling way, both through story and gameplay. I'll repeat again that this game may not be for everyone, but it is worth giving it a chance. It is a clever, untraditional experience with a lot of intricate moving pieces and ever-expanding systems, bolstered by a fascinating narrative setup, a compelling storyline with memorable characters, impeccable presentation with some mind-blowing visuals, and epic undertones, all of which service the game's ultimate message: we are stronger if we work together. I'm very curious to see how the rest of the world will receive this game, whether the masses will share my enthusiasm for this title, but for my part, I do think this game is one hell of an achievement in its own right, and it was such a refreshing game to play amidst the landscape of the typical. Thus concludes my review of Death Stranding, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. Let me know in the comments below what your take is on this title based on what I conveyed in this review, and to be further updated on more game news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out!